morning. Thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
You bet. My name's Jackson Hudecki. I am the Vice President of the Hamilton Naturalist Club in a volunteer capacity, and I'm in business development at Royal Botanical Gardens in a work capacity. I'm a born and raised Hamiltonian. I'm a father. I'm a musician, but I'm also an avid birder.
So you're an avid birder. I also really love birds, but birds can be intimidating for a lot of people because there's so much to learn. There's so many birds that look kind of similar to each other. How can you start getting into birding? What resources are there?
There are a multitude of resources, and I think the first thing that anyone needs to do is just get outside and listen and look and be comfortable with your surroundings. Bird behavior is a huge foray into getting into birds. It's just watching what they're doing. You don't need to know what they are to get into birds. You just need to know that they are. You just need to get outside or even get to a window, but somewhere where you can calm yourself and be one with nature around you, and then just start looking for and listening for birds. And if there are none around you, to just meander and find a spot where they are and continue to look and listen. I would be a terrible birder without binoculars. Binoculars are the next big step to get into birding, because once you're around them, then you want to see them. And sure, you can look with your bare eye, but seeing them up close with binoculars is a huge, great step, because then you start to see color, you start to see size a little bit better. You get to see more of their movements up close. And then, if you really want to get into learning more, there's groups, there's classes, there's clubs where you're then out with someone who, when you're looking at something, you're like, geez, there's a small brown bird. That person can say, hey, that is a song sparrow. That is a white-throated sparrow, and can really help separate which species these are. And then when you've gone home and you're super overwhelmed because you're like, oh my gosh, I've just seen 30 species in one day and I only really know 5 or 6, that's when you can bust out something like a field guide where you can then flip through and you can start to look at these birds up close and learn a little bit more about them. But the overarching thing that I think anybody needs when it comes to birds is patience. I think just being able to be patient with yourself and understand you're not going to know every bird when you see it. Even when you've been studying, you've been out for months and weeks and maybe years, you're not going to know every bird. It might be decades when you're like, oh shoot, what is this again? And it takes time to get into it. So having patience with yourself, patience with your surroundings is a huge plus.
Wow, that's a lot of different resources we have available to us. Now, most birders will say that there's 2 main ways to identify your birds: sight and sound. Can you tell us a little bit about the ways to identify birds by sight?
Sure. So again, we talked about binoculars. So again, I'd be a terrible birder if I didn't have a trusty pair of binoculars. So these are Vortex brand, which is great because they've got a plant in just Guelph, Ontario. But these are 8x42 magnification, and they're an incredible resource. So it's one where you get the strap around your neck nice and comfortable, or even these ones are the shoulder strap ones. And you just keep them nearby and keep them ready to go so that when you do see a bird, you kind of want to wait till you see it land. And then once you see it land, you then affix them to your face and just use the toggles in order to get them in focus. But if they're cruising by, if they're soaring, definitely try and find them. Using binoculars is its own skill. And once you master it, it will definitely go a long way. And then if you're able to, perhaps you would want to buy something like a spotting scope. And this is to help see things really far away. So this is great for lake watching. This is great for looking at ducks or waterfowl, like here on Coots Paradise, where you can stand on the shore and, again, see things really, really far away, really up close. I even bought a small adapter that goes onto a scope that I can affix my phone to, that I can take pictures of things, because oftentimes you'll see something. If you can get a picture of it, sometimes you can use your phone and just hold it up to your binoculars, or you can actually do that with this mechanism. But then you can go home and you can look at some things. And I mean, do you know how many friends I've texted to say, like, hey, can you help me ID this bird? And I get that a lot from people too. Use your resources, use the community around you, and those are great ways to help identify birds by sight.
And what about sound? There's a lot of different bird calls out there. How do you memorize so many?
A lot of it is, again, goes back to patience. It goes back to just observations. It goes back to timing. I like to, when talking to beginner birders, talk to them about how, like, you could probably tell the difference between an acoustic guitar and an electric guitar, or a stand-up bass, or an electric bass, or violin, pianos, keyboards, you name it. There are ways that we have been training ourselves to listen to music that I think you can akin to listening to birds. Certain birds carry certain tones. They have, I don't want to say dialects, even though they do, but when you're just starting, that can be kind of tough. But they definitely have kind of rhythms and beats to their calls and their songs. And when you start to learn about what species is what, when you look at them, you also then start to dive into their sound a bit. And if you're lucky enough to be looking at a bird singing or calling, then you start to capture that to memory. And then you can really start to narrow that down into certain families, because they will often sound very similar. Like, oh, yeah, that sounds a lot like a thrush, or that sounds like it could be a different sparrow, and it really does help focus down. But then it's that time, it's that patience, that going home. Allaboutbirds.org is a great website to listen to things. And most people, when you are carrying your phones on you, I'll suggest that people take their voice notes out and record the bird that they're hearing. Like, just stay still, stay calm, record it. And then that way you've got a recording of it that you can send to a friend. You can weigh against a website. And then I think the main thing that everyone is getting into, and this is people's way of really stepping into the birding world, is Merlin, the Merlin app. And you're able to just hold your phone out like it's the Shazam for birds, and you can hold it out and it tells you what you're listening to. And I think with like an 80% accuracy, I think that's one thing that a lot of birders are trying to express to people, is that it might not be the exact bird. You might not be like, oh my gosh, I'm listening to a scissor-tailed flycatcher, and you're here in Hamilton. There's a chance you're not actually listening to a scissor-tailed flycatcher, but Merlin thinks you are. It doesn't mean it's there. So it's a good way to say, like, I think it's around, then you got to find it, then you're sure. So multiple ways to get into bird sound, but again, it's just patience, because it does take a long time.
Wow, there's so many different ways to identify birds with sights and sounds. Is there any other tips and tricks you can give to people?
Definitely. I think one thing I think about before I go birding is how much time I have, because you do want to kind of allocate a good couple of hours every time you do go birding, mostly because once you start, it's really hard to stop birding. So figure out how much time you have, which then will determine where you want to go. And I think habitat and time of year are two major things. So I typically like to go wherever there is water, because we know water is life and all things need both water and plants to survive. So where you go can help determine what birds you'll see. And so many birds flock to water and flock to like mixed ecosystems where you've got like prairies and forests. Maybe there's a park nearby, but if there's a wetland there as well, there's a good chance you're going to see more species, more diversity. And luckily, Hamilton is ripe with great habitat to see birds in. We're in such an important location in Ontario for birds to funnel through. And luckily, Hamilton has had such good devotees to supporting ecosystem and ecosystem restoration, managing invasive species, planting native species, and then encouraging the population to continue to do so in their yards, because we are sharing this planet and we want our properties to be extensions of these wild spaces so that we can have more and more life around it. So I always like to think, okay, where might most birds be, or what birds do I want to see? What do I really like? Do I like gulls? Do I like waterfowl? Do I like songbirds? Do I like raptors? That will kind of determine where it is you go, and then you just got to seek those places out and then get yourself to them.
So you mentioned that timing is really important for birding. I was wondering if you could explain why timing is really important.
Sure, timing is everything when it comes to birds. So there's three types of timing I'm going to talk about. One is time of year. So if you're a beginner birder, I always think winter is an incredible time to start birding, because there's fewer species around. Like, we know birds are here all year, every month. So that's great. But the winter is a great time to just get out, because it's like, oh, you're familiarizing yourself with the species that are around. Because then as you get into spring, when migration starts, then it's a tidal wave of species and all these new birds are showing up, but you've already got yourself a good foundation to go upon. And then spring migration is incredible. Summertime, it gets to be a bit of a lull, but then we get into like the breeding bird side of things. Fall migration starts around August and goes through October, and then it turns back into kind of winter birding and waterfowl season. So that's one kind of timing. The other is time of day. Obviously, earliest in the morning is best for birds and to encounter birds. They might have been migrating all night and now they've landed and they're looking for ways to stock up. Midday gets to be a bit tough to look for birds, as you know, in the heat of the sun, but I really love evening for birds, particularly, especially birding by ear. And then the third type of timing is pure luck. Is just standing or being in the right spot at the random time to encounter a bird, because you really never know what's going to show up. And so that timing, that random timing, is everything. And so it just means being out in some particular spot and being ready for whatever's going to appear before you.